Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. I will begin by offering my sincere condolences to the family and friends of our late colleague, the Honourable Jim Carr. Jim was my friend. He was an excellent parliamentarian. He was a long-standing community and business leader, and I will miss him dearly, and my thoughts are with his loved ones. 1 year ago today, I officially apologize to all victims and survivors of sexual misconduct in the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. It was one of my first acts and one of the most meaningful acts that I undertook as Minister of National Defence. On that day, I said things can change, they must change, and they will change. It is our most basic responsibility, our most important task, and my top and absolute priority. 1 year later, here we are, and I still believe all of those words from the bottom of my heart. I knew then, and I know now, that actions are more powerful than words, and that for an apology to have meaning, it must be accompanied by transformative change. Today, I presented to Parliament our path forward for all 48 recommendations made by Madame Louise Arbour earlier this year in her final report of the Independent External Comprehensive Review. Il y a un an, moins un jour, je présentais des excuses officielles à toutes les victimes et survivantes d'inconduite sexuelle au sein du ministère de la Défense nationale et des Forces armées canadiennes. Ce fut l'un des premiers gestes que j'ai posés en tant que ministre de la Défense nationale. Cependant, je sais que les actions sont plus puissantes que les mots et que les excuses doivent s'accompagner d'un changement transformateur. Aujourd'hui, j'ai annoncé que nous ne rejetterons aucune des recommandations de Mme Arbour et que nous allons de l'avant pour y répondre. As I highlight in my report to Parliament, we are not rejecting any of Mme Arbour's recommendations. Rather, we are working to address all of her findings. This is an ambitious roadmap for reform developed through months of work and consultation. We will continue to put our shoulders to the wheel and deliver substantive changes to the way things are done at the Department of National Defence and in the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, before I take your questions, which I am always pleased to do, let me outline some key elements in our roadmap. First of all, I expect the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces to implement recommendation number 5, which is that Criminal Code sexual offences should be removed from the jurisdiction of the Canadian Armed Forces and that they should be prosecuted exclusively in civilian courts. I have directed officials to present options on how such jurisdictional change can occur in consultation with federal, provincial, and territorial partners, and in a way that addresses challenges like capacity of civilian police to investigate historical cases or those outside of Canada, including in conflict zones. As Madame Arbour herself acknowledges, implementation and amendments to the National Defence Act will take some time, likely years, and Madame Arbour's interim recommendation will remain in place in the meantime as she requests. Je m'attends à ce que le ministère de la Défense nationale et des Forces armées canadiennes mette en œuvre la recommandation 5, selon laquelle les infractions sexuelles visées par le Code criminel devraient être retirées de la compétence des Forces armées canadiennes et que les infractions doivent être poursuivies exclusivement devant des tribunaux civils dans tous les cas. Comme Mme Arbour le reconnaît elle-même, la mise en œuvre et les modifications de la loi sur la défense nationale prendront un certain temps, probablement des années. et la recommandation provisoire de Mme Arbour restera en vigueur dans l'intervalle comme elle le demande. Mais j'ai demandé à ce que des options soient présentées, options sur la façon dont ce changement de juridiction peut se produire. Pursuant to recommendations 7 and 9, I have also directed that the Canadian Armed Forces should cease filing any objections under Section 41(1)A of the Canadian Human Rights Act, and thus allow the Canadian Human Rights Commission to investigate CAF members' complaints for sexual harassment or discrimination on the basis of sex. Today, I'm also announcing our intent to establish a Canadian Military College Review Board in response to Recommendation 29. DND and CAF are developing draft terms of reference and ideas for the composition of this board, which will focus on the quality of education, socialization, and military training at the military colleges. These colleges attract some of the best that Canadian society has to offer. But let's be clear, the culture at our military colleges must change significantly, and we will ensure that this occurs. J'annonce également notre intention d'établir un conseil d'examen des collèges militaires canadiens. En réponse à la recommandation 29, ces collèges attirent certains des meilleurs étudiants de la société canadienne. Mais soyons clairs, la culture de nos collèges militaires doit changer de façon significative. Finally, I will highlight that I've directed the military to establish a system of progressive targets for the promotion of women to address Recommendation 36. This will increase the number of women in each rank with a view to increasing their representation in the general and flag officer ranks above their level of representation in the military overall. These are just a few of the measures that I announced today, and the remainder are detailed in my report to parliamentarians. As a former academic, I know that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that is why I and we are committed to honesty, transparency, and accountability. En octobre, j'ai nommé Jocelyne Therrien au poste de contrôleuse externe afin d'aider à surveiller la mise en œuvre des recommandations de Mme Arbour. I have met with Mme Therrien regularly, and she will continue to provide open, transparent, and accountable updates. Additionally, DND and CAF officials will continue to provide regular culture change updates to stakeholders and to the media. Finally, let me reiterate that culture change will not happen overnight, and that it cannot happen from the top down. It will only succeed if it is a team effort, and it will continue to require the involvement and the commitment of every DND employee and CAF member, to all of our people in uniform and the civilians who support them. I invite you to take up this call to arms and to pursue this mission with the same commitment and the same vigor for which Canada's military is known around the globe. Le progrès est nécessaire, possible et réalisable, et continuons à y travailler ensemble. Progress is necessary, possible, and achievable, and let us continue to work towards it together. Thank you. Merci, miigwech. I am now happy to take your questions.
Over the past year, 97 cases of sexual assault have been referred to the civilian system, but 40 have been rejected by the system. Are you concerned that the already backlogged civilian system is not able to handle this additional burden of military cases they'll now face?
I am well aware of the facts that you just presented, and I am well aware that rejections are happening. And that is why Madame Arbour recommended the substance of recommendation number 5. My direction today is to deliver on this recommendation for the very reason that rejections are happening in the first place.
Combien de temps pour cette recommandation? Vous parlez d'années, ça peut être décourageant pour bien des gens. Vous vous donnez combien de temps pour mettre en place concrètement cette recommandation numéro 5?
Comme Mme Arbour le reconnaît elle-même, la mise en œuvre prendra plusieurs années. Et comme le recommande Mme Arbour, je m'attends à ce que les forces armées et les autorités civiles continuent de respecter la recommandation provisoire dans l'intervalle. Donc, je sais qu'il y a une longue échéancier. Donc, nous devons continuer avec la recommandation provisoire dans l'intervalle.
Est-ce que ça prend plus de temps? Est-ce que c'est plus difficile que vous ne le croyez changer la culture des forces armées? Vous dites qu'il y a un an, vous étiez convaincu, puis là, on a l'impression que ça va prendre encore des années.
Pas du tout. Je suis convaincue, bien sûr. Ça, c'est la raison que je suis ici aujourd'hui. Ça, c'est la raison que je suis forte avec notre réponse de le rapport de Mme Arbour. Et j'ai voyagé partout dans notre pays sur les bases. Et j'ai parlé avec les forces armées canadiennes et ils veulent changer la culture. Donc, ça, c'est une roadmap pour changer la culture de les forces armées canadiennes et notre équipe de défense. Et je voudrais dire aussi que ça, ce n'est pas une situation où nous pouvons avoir les changements maintenant, aujourd'hui ou la semaine prochaine. Ça, c'est un processus et nous devons être ensemble. Ce n'est pas seulement le ministre de la Défense nationale, ce n'est pas seulement le leadership de notre équipe. Ça, c'est un processus où nous avons besoin, tout le monde, d'être avec nous, surtout les forces armées canadiennes, surtout les membres de notre équipe de la Défense.
Of timeframes on a few of these recommendations. How are you going to prevent that from hurting your accountability and actually implementing these?
Well, to begin, I want to say that this is the first time that the Government of Canada, in response to a set of recommendations from a Supreme Court Justice, has set out a roadmap and a response to each and every recommendation and has published that response and has said, furthermore, that there will be quarterly updates, as we've been providing since last year, in regards to our progress, and that now we have an external monitor, Jocelyn Tarignan, who will herself also provide an update in April. So what I'm saying is that this time it is different. We are here with a roadmap for progress, and we will continue to update you and hold ourselves to be accountable by you, by our stakeholders, by the Canadian public on how we are achieving the metrics that we are setting out in this report. So I look forward to having a continuing conversation with you about our progress. And let me finally say that we received this final report on May 30th, 2022. I am before you on December 13th, 2022 with a full-fledged roadmap. That has meant extremely hard work by our civil servants and members of the force, the Canadian Armed Forces, but also by every member of my team who will continue to work diligently. It's not just morally right, it's operationally necessary. As you know, the Canadian Armed Forces is in a recruitment challenge, and we need to hold the confidence of the Canadian public to say this is an institution that is undergoing cultural change, and this cultural change will continue to occur. It will take time, and we will see it through. And finally, I will say that as minister, we never know how long we are going to hold our positions. But my goal is to put in place the institutional reforms necessary so that cultural change can last our lifetimes.
What is it about the recommendation in terms of number 5? You're saying that your plan will alleviate some of the problems that the civilian system has faced in terms of rejecting these cases. So is it that the change in the National Defense Act needs to occur? Will there be federal money going towards provinces to help the civilian system carry that burden? Who takes care of the travel expenses, for example, when these cases occur abroad, right? So what part of this plan addresses the seeming reluctance of the civilian system to take on these cases?
I appreciate the number of factors that you've laid out, and those are exactly the number of factors and others that I have said to my officials. As you can see in the report itself, there are challenges ahead in order to ensure that recommendation number 5 can be implemented. And these options that the officials will develop for me will not happen overnight, because there are investigations that happen outside Canada. There are issues with civilian police force capacity. There is the need to collaborate with provinces and territories. What I am saying in this report is that we are committed to addressing these issues. And in the meantime, we will ensure that Madame Arbour's interim recommendation is followed and adhered to, so that we allow the time to implement the larger recommendation put on the table by Madame Arbour herself after studying the military justice system. And as a former Supreme Court justice, and in light of the extensive work that she did, I have full confidence in the work that she did, and I thank her for it.
Point, he talked about providing federal money to police forces provincially, municipally. That is something that they have been asking for. I don't know if we've heard from you specifically on that. Is that something that the federal government is considering to sort of beef up their capacity?
So now we're talking about the implementation of Madame Arbour's interim recommendation, and the report that I presented today was about all 48 recommendations and a roadmap forward, to be clear. On the interim recommendation, what we are doing now is ensuring that our officials are collaborating with the provinces and territories at a table that has been stood up to ensure the systematization and the smooth transfer of cases from one system of justice to another. You can imagine, with so many provinces around the table, that there are differing views of how this should occur. That is one of the reasons we are moving towards recommendation number 5 in the final instance. But in the current matter, I will say that I have had very collaborative conversations. We do have jurisdictions like Quebec that are accepting these cases readily. We also have the RCMP, again, accepting these cases readily. I believe the future is bright for a smooth, continual transfer of cases. Thank you. Just because he hasn't asked a question yet. Yeah.
This report is exhaustive in the number of recommendations it makes. If you take all of them, as you are planning to do, it will overhaul how the forces recruits, trains, promotes members right across the board. Are you concerned about making that much change to the system while you're in a recruitment challenge, while we're seeing more global threats around the world, while we're, moving out of a world of peace, I guess?
So whereas you might present it as a challenge, I see it as an opportunity. We need to attract Canadians to the Canadian Armed Forces. We need to address the reconstitution issue head on. And the way we do that, at least in part, is to evidence a sincere commitment to cultural change, so that parents across this country can look at the Canadian Armed Forces and say, yes, this is an institution where I would like to see my child develop. Or young people across our country and others who are considering joining the Canadian Armed Forces can have confidence that if they join and if they put on a uniform to protect our country each and every day, they will have the confidence that they will be protected and respected when they serve either in Canada or internationally. That, to me, is a benefit. This cultural change, this transformative reform is absolutely essential to the longevity and the robustness with which the Canadian Armed Forces can grow.
I just got to ask you, putting your parenting hat on, you're the parent of 4 kids. I assume your sisters may have kids. They're extended family. Would you let any one of your nieces and nephews or kids, if they were still considering university, go to one of the military colleges right now, as it stands?
I have traveled to the military colleges. I am actually the chancellor of the military colleges, and I have met with students on the ground numerous times who have a sincere love of the work that they do in the colleges and who have confidence in the ability of these colleges to meet the task at hand, which is to be accepting of minorities, be accepting of women, and to allow students to together ensure that change is part of their future. And I believe very sincerely in the ability of these colleges to meet this challenge head on.
And just as a follow-up to that, is there a concern that the review of these colleges is independent enough? I mean, the Brigadier General overseeing RMC could, help their career by sweeping things under the rug. Not that I'm saying they would right now, but it could happen. So how do we know that it's going to be independent enough that the problems that we keep seeing at these colleges get fixed?
So you will recall that prior to coming into the life of politics, I spent over 20 years in academia, and one of my areas of specialty was governance. And I understand deeply the need for independent reviews, whether it's in this circumstance or other circumstance. In fact, much of my writing relates to the benefits of independent directors on corporate boards. So when you talk about reviews, I am fully aware of the need to ensure that the set of qualifications for those who are serving on the review board have the integrity necessary to ensure that the review is independent and stands on its own as an objective analysis of the situation in the colleges.
If the independent review recommends closing the colleges, will you accept that recommendation? Are you committing to that up front?
I would say that it is far too early at this stage for me to presuppose the outcome of the review and for me to respond to a hypothetical situation. My view, as I just mentioned, is to ensure that the review of the colleges occurs with integrity, and I will not presuppose the results of that review board at this time. Thank you very much.
Recommendation 36 before you go.
I've got to go to committee, but I will invite you to speak with Daniel and hopefully be able to respond to your question, at least in writing. Thank you so much, everyone. Oh yes, I heard that, Paul. Okay, merci beaucoup tout le monde.